Good evening. My friends, I want you to think about something for a moment. Not something dramatic. Not something that requires you to close your eyes or visualize a golden light. Just something quiet. Something you have been doing every waking hour of your life without ever once stopping to notice it. You are talking to yourself right now. Not out loud. Not in a way anyone else can hear. But there is a conversation happening inside you at this very moment. And it has been happening since the day you first learned what words were. A steady, murmuring stream of sentences, judgments, questions, small declarations, and quiet little verdicts about who you are, what you deserve, and what the world thinks of you. Most people never examine this conversation. They live inside it the way a fish lives inside water, completely unaware that the medium itself is shaping everything. They watch the outer world for clues. They look at their bank account, their empty inbox, the silence where a phone call should have come, and they ask, why isn't the law working for me? Why do I assume and nothing seems to change? Tonight I want to give you the answer, not a comfort, not a reframe that makes the waiting feel a little easier. The answer is this. You have been tending to your imagination while neglecting your conversation. You have been building beautiful images in your mind, and then, the moment you open your eyes, walking straight back into the old dialect, the dialect of someone who is still waiting, still asking, still, in the quiet of your own skull, having the exact conversation you have always had. The images you build in 30 minutes each night are real. They are seeds, but the conversation is 23 and a half hours, and the 23 and a half hours will always win. If this lands somewhere true in you, if you feel something shift even slightly in your chest, I want to ask you to leave a word in the comments below. Just the word conversation. It is a simple thing, but it tells me that something here is opening for you. And it helps this teaching reach the people who are ready for it. If you have not yet found your way to this channel, this is a good moment to stay. What we discuss here is not motivation. It is not positive thinking dressed in Neville Goddard's name. What we discuss is the actual inner mechanics of how your life is being built. Right now, sentence by silent sentence. Now let me take you deeper. Neville Goddard said something that is repeated endlessly in this tradition without being truly understood. He said that your inner conversation is perpetually outpicturing itself in the world around you. Not your visualization, not your affirmations. Your inner conversation, the automatic, habitual, running stream of internal speech that you carry beneath every moment of your life like a song you forgot you were humming. Think about what this actually means. It means that the dominant sentences running through your mind right now, the ones you say to yourself about your finances, your worthiness, your relationships, your future, those sentences are not private experiences that exist only inside your skull. They are instructions. They are being received by something deeper than thought, something Neville called the subconscious, but which we might simply call the creative soil of your being. And they are being faithfully, obediently, without any judgment at all, grown into form, every day, every hour, every word. The outer world is not sending you problems. The outer world is sending you transcripts. Sit with that for a moment. Your circumstances are not obstacles placed in your path by some indifferent force. They are the printed record of a conversation you have been having with yourself, often without knowing it, the relationship that never quite arrives, or that arrives and then slowly dissolves, is the transcript of an inner voice that, somewhere beneath the hopeful imaginings, has been saying things like, people always leave eventually, or I love deeply but I am never quite enough for someone to stay. The bank account that empties faster than it fills is the transcript of a voice that, quietly and reliably, says, there is never enough, or money is hard for people like me, or I work hard but I never really get ahead. I know this is not what you want to hear. I also know that some part of you, the deeper, honest part, recognizes it as true. Here is where most teachings stop. They tell you to affirm differently. They tell you to write your desire 100 times before bed. They tell you to feel the wish fulfilled in your imagination each night. And this is not wrong. This is real. This is profoundly powerful. But it is incomplete without what I am about to show you. Because the imagination session is 30 minutes. Perhaps an hour if you are devoted. The inner conversation is 23.5 hours. You cannot plant carefully for 30 minutes and then sow carelessly for the other 23 and expect a harvest that matches only what you planted in the chair. Let me tell you about a young woman who came to a teacher I know. She had been practicing the law for nearly 2 years. Earnestly, consistently. She was not casual about it. Each night after her household had quieted and the lights were low, she would sit in the same chair, enter that receptive inner state that Neville called the state akin to sleep, and she would feel, genuinely and deeply feel, what it would be like to receive the call from the publishing house. She had written a manuscript, years of work. She could feel the phone warm in her hand. She could hear the warmth and professional excitement in the editor's voice. She felt the relief so completely that some nights she would come out of the session with tears on her face because the feeling had been that real. 2 years, no call. When she finally sat with the teacher, he asked her a single question. Not about her visualization, not about whether she was holding the scene long enough or feeling it correctly. He asked, "What do you say to yourself about your writing when you are doing the dishes, in the car on the way to work, in that 10 seconds after you close a rejection letter and set it down on the counter and turn back to whatever you were doing?" She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I say, who am I kidding?" 3 words. Said quietly, said the way you breathe, said not once but dozens of times a week, running underneath every earnest effort she was making, slipping beneath the imagination sessions and the gratitude journals and the careful techniques. Who am I kidding? That was the real conversation. That was the dominant seed. And the law had been outpicturing it with the same faithfulness it outpictures every seed. Because the law does not distinguish between the seed you planted on purpose and the one that blew in on the wind of an unguarded thought. It grows what is consistently present. And what is consistently present was the quiet inner verdict of someone who, despite everything she was doing in the chair, did not believe, in the 23.5 hours between sessions, that she was really the person the publishing house was waiting for. The teacher gave her a single instruction, not a new visualization, not a more elaborate technique. He said this for the next 3 weeks. Your only work is to notice when you are having the wrong conversation, and to replace it with the right one, not the conversation of hope, not the conversation of desire, the conversation of someone who already knows, the conversation of the version of her who had received the call 6 months ago and was now simply a published author living her life, thinking about ordinary things, with that fact quietly settled in the bedrock of her identity. 3 weeks later, before anything had changed in the physical world, before a single new submission had been sent, she wrote to the teacher and said, "Something has shifted. I cannot point to it. I cannot name it exactly, but the silence inside me is different." The call came 6 weeks after that. My friends, I want to stay with this story for a moment because I think there is something in it that goes beyond the obvious lesson. When she said, "The silence inside me is different," she was describing something very precise. She was describing the shift from a consciousness that is still waiting to a consciousness that is, in some quiet interior way, already settled, already arrived, It did not arrive because something in the outer world changed. It arrived because the inner conversation changed. And once the inner conversation changed, the outer world had no choice but to rearrange itself to match the new signal. Not immediately, not dramatically. In its season, the way a seed grows, not with fanfare, but with the slow, irresistible certainty of a law that cannot fail. Now let me explain why this works. Because if you understand the mechanism, the practice becomes far less effortful. Neville taught that the subconscious mind is completely, perfectly literal. It does not evaluate your statements for sincerity. It does not weigh your dreams against your doubts and decide which one deserves more weight. It simply receives what is impressed upon it with feeling and repetition. And it builds that impression into form. It is not good or bad, wise or foolish. It is the most obedient instrument in existence. Tell it often enough that you are someone things work out for, with enough genuine feeling behind that telling, and it will build a life in which things work out. Tell it often enough, beneath your breath, beneath your conscious attention, that you are someone things never quite work out for, and it will build that with equal precision. The subconscious does not respond to what you want. It responds to what you are. And what you are, at an moment, is exactly the sum of the dominant conversation you have been having with yourself. There is a metaphor I want to offer you. Imagine a river that has been running in a particular channel for many years. The banks of that channel are worn deep. The water flows easily along those grooves because the grooves are already there. This is the old conversation, worn deep by years of repetition, flowing with no effort because that is simply where the river goes. Now imagine someone who wants to redirect that river. The wrong way to do it is to build a dam and fight against the current. That creates turbulence, and eventually the water will find a way around. The right way is to gradually, patiently, day by day, begin carving a new channel alongside the old one. At first, the new channel is shallow. The water mostly ignores it. But every day, a little more water finds its way into the new groove. Every day, the new channel deepens slightly. And over time, without drama and without force, the river begins to prefer the new path. Because water always follows the deepest, clearest channel available. Your inner conversation works exactly this way. The old sentences are a deep channel. They will not disappear overnight. You do not want them to disappear overnight, because trying to make them disappear is fighting the current. What you want is to begin carving the new channel, slowly, consistently, without resistance, and over days and weeks. The inner voice, the automatic river of your inner speech, will begin to flow more naturally in the new direction. This is not willpower. This is patient, intelligent attention to where the voice is going, and a gentle, repeated invitation for it to go somewhere new. So what is the wrong conversation? I want to be very specific about this, because vague instructions produce vague results. The wrong conversation always has one of three textures. Learn to recognize them. The first texture is the verdict. The verdict is the sentence that sounds like a conclusion about your life or yourself. Things like, "This is just how things are for me. I have always struggled with money. Relationships never work out the way I want them to. I am the kind of person who tries hard but never quite gets there." The verdict is dangerous precisely because it does not sound like negativity. It sounds like honest self-knowledge. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the mature acceptance of how things are. But it is not wisdom. It is old conditioning dressed up as insight. The verdict is simply a story that hardened into apparent fact through years of being told. And it is asking to be believed as though it were an unchangeable truth. It is not. No verdict about your life is an unchangeable truth. It is a seed that was planted and grew. It can be replaced by a different seed. The second texture is the question that assumes a negative answer. This is the quiet, rhetorical habit of asking yourself things like, why does nothing I try ever work? Why does everyone else seem to get what they want so easily? Why can't I catch a break? These questions sound like searching. They sound like someone genuinely trying to understand their situation. But they are not questions. They are declarations in disguise. The mind does not process the question mark. The mind processes the premise. And the premise of why does nothing I try ever work is the declaration that nothing I try ever works. That is what gets planted in the soil. Not the searching, the assumption buried in the searching. The third texture is the negotiation of waiting. This one is the most seductive because it sounds positive. It sounds like this: I know it is coming. I just have to be patient. I am sure it will work out eventually. Maybe if I just keep going a little longer. This conversation feels like faith. It feels like trust. But listen underneath the words. Underneath them is the posture of someone standing at a window, watching the road, waiting for something to arrive. The dominant inner experience is not arrival. It is watching and waiting. And that is what gets planted. Not the hopeful words. The underlying state of a person who is still waiting for something that has not come yet. Now, what does the right conversation sound like? It does not sound like any of those three textures. It does not sound like a verdict because there is nothing to conclude. The thing simply is. It does not sound like a question because there is nothing to ask. The thing simply is. It does not sound like waiting because there is nothing to wait for. The thing simply is. The right conversation sounds like comfort. It sounds like the quiet, unremarkable background hum of someone who is not thinking about their desire, because their desire has already come and they have moved on to other thoughts. It sounds like someone talking to a friend about where they want to go for lunch, while somewhere in the bedrock of their being there is simply the settled, undramatic fact of the thing that was once longed for now being simply part of who they are. Neville called this naturalness, not excitement, not performed gratitude, not even what most people would recognize as faith, because faith still implies effort, still implies holding on. Naturalness is something quieter than that. It is the ease of someone who has stopped holding on because the thing no longer requires holding on to. It is simply there, like your name, like your own face. You do not feel grateful for your face every morning. You do not affirm that you have a face. It is assumed. It is the background. That is the conversation of the fulfilled state, that quiet, settled, unremarkable assumption. Now let me give you the practice. For the next 7 days, you are going to become an observer of your own inner voice, not a judge, not a corrector, an observer. You are going to move through your day with a soft, steady part of your attention resting on the stream of sentences running beneath everything else. You are not looking for every thought. You are specifically listening for the three textures: the verdict, the disguised question, the posture of waiting. In the first 2 days, your only work is to notice. Do not try to replace anything yet. Do not argue with the old sentences or be disturbed that they are there. Simply catch them. Name them to yourself quietly. There goes a verdict. There is the waiting posture. That is a question that is actually a declaration. This act of noticing, clean and without shame, is more powerful than it sounds. What has been operating in the dark begins to lose its authority the moment you shine a quiet light on it. What was unconscious and automatic begins to become conscious and visible. And conscious things can be changed. Unconscious things simply run on forever. On days 3 and 4, when you catch one of the old textures, you will take one breath, and you will offer what I will call the natural statement, not an affirmation in the traditional sense. Affirmations often still carry the slight strain of trying. the texture of someone who is working to convince themselves of something they are not quite sure about yet. The natural statement is different. It is the quiet, matter-of-fact sentence that the version of you who already has the thing would say in this exact moment. Doing this exact thing, not something grand, not something that requires a leap your nervous system cannot make. Just the smallest, truest thing you can say from the other side. If the old sentence was, I never have enough money, the natural statement is not, I am wealthy beyond measure and abundance flows to me now. The mind will not settle into that. It is too far a stretch and the body knows it. The natural statement might be, things have a way of working out for me. Or, money has been moving more freely lately. Or even just, I am not worried about this. The test is simple. When you say it, does your body settle slightly? Does there feel like a small landing? Like a foot finding firm ground? That settling is how you know you have found the right statement for this moment. It is true enough to rest in. It points in the right direction. And it is said from the state of having, not the state of hoping. On days 5 and 6, you will begin to extend those natural statements into natural inner monologues, not conversations you have out loud. The inner narration that runs when you are alone, on a long drive, doing something with your hands. In the quiet before sleep, begin to let that narration speak from the other side. Let it wander naturally into the territory of a life that already contains what you want. Not how you got there. Not the dramatic story of the arrival. Just the ordinary, downstream thoughts of someone whose life simply includes this thing now. What would you think about if the desire were just a settled fact, not what you would feel in the moment of receiving it? What would you be thinking about 6 months after receiving it? A year after, you would be thinking about ordinary things. The desire would be in the background, a given, the context, not the focus. Let your mind begin to inhabit that downstream territory. Those mundane, settled thoughts are the most powerful signal you can send to the subconscious, because they do not carry the texture of wanting. They carry the texture of having. And the soil cannot tell the difference between a thought you are having about a real memory and a thought you are having about an imagined future. It only knows the feeling, and the feeling of already having is unmistakable. On day 7, you will notice something. It will be subtle, not a breakthrough, not a sudden rush of evidence from the outer world. Something quieter than that. The old sentences will still come. They have years of repetition behind them and they are not yet finished. But they will carry slightly less weight. They will sound, for the first time, like what they have always been. Not truth, habit, old recordings from an old version of you that is slowly, steadily becoming the past. And in that recognition, something important will happen. You will stop treating them as reports. You will stop using them as evidence of what is real. They will begin to feel like the noise of a neighbor in an apartment you are moving out of. Present, audible, but no longer your home. And beneath them, the new conversation will have taken root. Not yet dominant, not yet automatic, but real, growing, deepening the new channel. Now I want to speak to something that I know many of you are quietly holding right now. Some of you have been practicing this work for a long time. Some of you have been sincere and disciplined and devoted. And you have seen results in some areas and struggled in others. And perhaps the area where you have struggled longest is the one that matters most to you. And it can be deeply wearying to continue when the one desire that has occupied your heart for years remains unfulfilled. I want to speak directly to that weariness. The weariness itself is a form of the wrong conversation, not a moral failing, not evidence that the law does not work for you. It is simply the natural response of a consciousness that has been trying hard for a long time in a slightly wrong direction. Like someone who has been pushing a door that says pull, The effort has been real. The desire has been real. The direction has been slightly off. And the direction that has been off is not the visualization. It is not the feeling during the session. It is the conversation in the 23.5 hours between sessions. The conversation that, however carefully tended in the chair, has been allowed to run old and unexamined in the rest of the day. This is not a reason to be discouraged. It is the most encouraging thing I can tell you, because it means the blockage is not in your desire. It is not in your worthiness. It is not in some cosmic decision about whether you deserve this thing. It is in a habit, a conversational habit. And habits, unlike fate, can be changed. You are not someone who cannot have this. You are someone who has been accidentally telling yourself a story about someone who cannot have this. That is a very different thing. And you can begin tonight to tell a different story. There is something Neville returned to many times that I want to close with tonight. He spoke about what he called the feeling of already having as the most natural state in the world, not the most effortful state. The most natural, he said, that when a desire is truly assumed, there is no more straining for it than there is straining to remember your own name. It is simply true. It is simply you, and the world simply reflects it. What he was pointing to is this. The fulfilled state is not something you build from the outside in. You do not manifest the desire and then feel fulfilled. You feel fulfilled first. Internally, in the conversation, in the quiet inner narrative, and the desire follows as the natural outpicturing of who you now are. You are not waiting to become the person who has this thing. You are deciding now, in the privacy of your inner voice, to speak as that person speaks, to narrate as that person narrates, to carry in the background of your waking hours the same settled, unremarkable assumption that person carries. Not a belief you are trying to build, an assumption you are choosing to inhabit. The outer world has no choice but to reflect that assumption back to you. It is law, not metaphor, not poetry. Law. The mirror cannot show anything except what stands before it. Stand before it as the person who already has what they want. Not in grand declaration, not in forced emotion, but in the quiet, steady language of the inner conversation, and the mirror must eventually show you exactly that. There is a quality I have noticed in the people who make this shift most completely. It is not intensity. It is not effort. It is a certain unhurried patience combined with a deep inner certainty that borders on indifference to the outer world's timetable. They are not checking. They are not looking for signs. They are simply living, speaking to themselves in the language of someone who has already arrived, and trusting, the way you trust the sun to rise, that the outer world will catch up. That trust is the final piece. And trust is not something you manufacture. It grows naturally from the practice of the new conversation. The more you speak to yourself from the other side, the more the inner body relaxes into it. The more it relaxes into it, the less urgency you feel. The less urgency you feel, the less resistance you create, and the less resistance you create, the faster the thing comes. Not because you are manipulating a timeline, because you are no longer, with every anxious inner sentence, pushing the thing away. Let me take you somewhere for a moment. Let me take you to the picture of what life actually looks and feels like when the new conversation has become your default. Not the day the desire arrives. After that, a year after that, perhaps, when it has settled into simply the fabric of your life. There is no fanfare in this picture. That is the first thing to understand. Most people imagine that when the desire finally arrives, there will be some prolonged period of extraordinary gratitude and joy. And yes, in the first days there is joy. But life, being life, absorbs it. The new thing becomes the new normal. The consciousness expands to include it and moves on to the next horizon. What does remain, however, is a particular quality of being, a different default setting in the inner voice, because the person on the other side of the fulfilled desire is speaking to themselves differently about the world. They are speaking from inside a different story. A story in which things can come to them. A story in which the universe is not withholding. A story in which they are, at the most fundamental level, someone for whom life works. And here is what is important about this. That story, that new default setting, that new quality of inner conversation, now produces the next thing, and the next. Not because they are trying harder, because they are simply, quietly, internally, continuing to speak as someone for whom life works. The river has found the new channel, and now it runs there naturally. This is why people who make one real shift in consciousness sometimes find that several desires arrive at once, or in close succession. It is not coincidence. It is the accumulated interest on a changed conversation. The soil that was growing one thing is now growing everything in that same direction. Because the shift was not in the specific desire, the shift was in the underlying identity conversation. And the identity conversation produces everything. Think about the person in your life. And you have known one, everyone has known one, who seems to move through the world with an ease that is almost irritating. Things open for them, opportunities find them, relationships deepen without drama. Money moves toward them with a fluency that seems unfair. And when you look closely at how they talk to themselves, how they narrate their own life in casual conversation, you notice something. They do not catastrophize. They do not rehearse failure. They do not talk about what might go wrong or what never seems to work. Their inner conversation, as expressed in their outer speech, which is always a reflection of the inner, has the texture of someone who simply expects good things, not in an entitled, demanding way, inner natural, settled. This is just how life tends to go for me way. They did not decide this consciously. Most of them did not study Neville Goddard. They simply absorbed, somewhere in their early experience, a story about themselves and the world that said things come through. And the law has been faithfully outpicturing that story ever since. What you are doing with this practice is consciously building what they received unconsciously. You are taking the pen back. You are deciding what story the inner voice tells. And you are doing it not through force but through the patient, consistent, gentle repetition of a new inner language until that language becomes, as all languages do with practice, simply the way you speak. I want to speak for a moment about something Neville called revision, because it is directly related to what we have been discussing, and it offers a specific practice for the evenings that I want to add to the 7-day training. Revision is the practice of taking an event from your day that did not go the way you wanted, and, in imagination, revising it, playing it again in your mind, but this time as it should have gone. Not as a form of denial, not to pretend the difficult thing did not happen, but to plant in the soil of your subconscious the feeling of how it would have felt to have gone differently, to give the creative faculty a new impression to work from. But here is what most people miss about revision. It is not just a technique for fixing bad days. It is a technique for changing the inner conversation about who you are. When something does not go the way you want, the natural inner response is to add it to the evidence file. The evidence file is the mental folder where your subconscious stores all the proof that the old story is true. The rejection goes in the file. The silence goes in the file. The setback goes in the file. And the file grows. And the old story grows with it. And the inner conversation that emerged from the old story grows stronger because now there is more evidence. Revision interrupts this. When you revise the event, you are not adding it to the evidence file. You are replacing it in the file with something that supports the new story. You are, in a very precise sense, editing the record that your subconscious is building about who you are and how your life goes. So in the evenings, at the end of your day, before you sleep, take 5 minutes. Scan the day, not to judge it, simply to find the moments where the old conversation got traction. The moment the rejection arrived and you felt the old familiar sinking. The moment the account was lower than expected and the old worry moved through you. The moment the silence stretched and the old doubt returned. Find those moments, and for each one, sit quietly for 30 seconds and play it differently. Not elaborately, just feel, briefly, what it would have felt like if the moment had gone in the direction of the new story. The call came back positive. The account showed a different number. The silence ended with a message. Feel that alternative. Not as a pretense, but as an act of deliberate planting. Then let it go and sleep. This practice, combined with the daytime practice of catching and replacing the old conversation, creates a powerful double movement. In the day, you are changing what you plant going forward. In the evening, you are tending the soil that the day's events left behind. Both movements together accelerate the shift in the inner conversation more than either one alone. There is a phrase Neville used that I want to leave with you tonight as a kind of compass for this practice. He said, "Feel after him." He meant, feel after the God within you. Feel after the consciousness of the fulfilled state. Feel after the inner sense of what it is like to already be on the other side. Not see it from the outside as something you want. Feel after it from the inside as something that is already true. Feel after the conversation. Feel after the sentences the other version of you is speaking to itself right now. In the parallel reality where the thing has already come, what does that version of you say while making coffee in the morning? What does it say while walking to the car? What does it say in the late afternoon when the mind wanders? Feel after those sentences, and when you find one that your body can settle into, stay with it, just for a moment, just long enough for the soil to receive it. That is the practice. That is the whole of it, distilled to its simplest form. Notice the old conversation. Offer the natural statement. Let the inner monologue begin to run from the other side. Revise the day's evidence each evening. Feel after the inner language of the version of you that already has the thing. Not for 30 minutes a night. For the whole of the living day, in small moments, in quiet moments, in the unremarkable, ordinary, unguarded moments when the real conversation has always run. And where the real change can be made. Go gently into this week. My friends, not with urgency, not with the pressure of someone who needs this to work immediately, with the quiet confidence of someone who has understood something tonight that perhaps, for the first time, cuts through to the real cause of the real work. Not the imagination session, not the technique, the conversation that runs in the car, in the kitchen, in the 10 seconds between one thought and the next, the conversation that no one hears but the soil that grows your life. Begin to change that conversation. One sentence, one caught verdict, one natural statement placed quietly in its place, one downstream thought allowed to drift through the mind before sleep. That is the whole of it. That is where your life is actually built. Until we meet again in this space, listen to what the voice inside you is saying, not to judge it, to know it, and then, knowing it, to begin, very gently, to tell a better story. It always works. It has always worked. It is working right now. It only needs a new conversation to build toward. Be well, be steady, and above all, Be honest with yourself about what the inner voice has been saying, so that you can freely, finally, choose what it says next.